Everything started with one devastating text that ripped my world apart. My phone buzzed violently, and I stared in disbelief at the message. Impossible! We live together, and all you need to do is sign the divorce papers. Good luck with your miserable life. In that brutal moment, everything I thought I knew crumbled, as cruel laughter echoed on the other end, sparking a cascade of betrayal, heartache, and eventually a powerful rebirth. My name is Catherine, and I am the CEO of one of the successful companies. I've been married to Brandon for 3 years now. We do not have children, and perhaps this is due to our excessive immersion in work. We are both so busy that even weekends rarely provide an opportunity to spend time together. Most often, our everyday lives are spent running around, where we cross paths only in passing, without having time to exchange words. Therefore, we had to organize our schedule so that at least once a year, we could find time to travel abroad. These short moments together are our salvation, a small oasis in the ocean of busyness. When we first got married, we decided to invest in buying an apartment on the top floor of a tower in the Bay Area. This decision gave us a lot of difficulties, especially financial ones, but in the end, it turned out to be the right one. We knew that the value of real estate in this area would increase over time, and it would be a profitable investment in the future. Despite everything, we are both happy with our life and home. Isabel, my close friend from school years, plays an important role in my life. We sometimes meet for lunch, although we have less and less time. Isabel has always been a beauty, but her demands on men have always been high. She wants to get married, but only to a man with a good education and a high income. She spends hours on dating apps, carefully selecting candidates, and agreeing to nothing less than the ideal she has surrounded herself with. One day, we were having lunch at a cafe near the park when Isabel suddenly said she wanted to visit my apartment. It was strange. She had never expressed such a desire before. But the next weekend she came, and her reaction was indescribable. Even through the intercom, her surprise could be heard. When I opened the door, her eyes widened in admiration. "Wow, this place looks like a mansion," she said, looking around. The elevator that took her to the top floor seemed too long to her, but the end result was worth the wait. Isabel continued to look around the apartment enthusiastically, not hiding her delight. Her eyes glowed with wonder, and it seemed she couldn't stop turning her head, assessing every corner of the space. "It's even more spacious than a house," she remarked admiringly, marveling at the view. "It's just incredible, really impressive." Her voice was full of genuine admiration. She looked around once more and added, "Great location, this top floor in a high-rise building. It must have cost a fortune." The smile never left her face, and there was something in her tone that made me wonder exactly what thoughts were running through her mind. "Yes, you could say it's a $1 million condo," I replied, laughing a little. But Isabel immediately picked up on the phrase, her gaze flashing. "$1 million? Your husband must earn a lot of money," she said in amazement, her eyes widening in admiration. This was so typical of Isabel. She had always been more interested in a man's income than anything else. I'd known this about her since she was in school, when she always set the bar high for finding a partner solely based on his financial status. "Yes, Brandon has a good salary, especially for his age," I replied, trying to be restrained and not attach too much importance to money. But I didn't like discussing it openly. I felt that an open conversation about income was inappropriate, and my caution did not go unnoticed by Isabel. There was something in her eyes, like an ulterior motive, but she quickly looked away. "Can I use your bathroom?" she suddenly asked, interrupting the conversation. I nodded and directed her in the right direction, then went to the kitchen to make tea. But as I was having tea, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Isabel stayed in the bathroom longer than I expected. After a while, just as I was about to check if she was okay, she returned, holding her phone in her hands. "I was just answering a letter," she said, although such excuses were not typical for her. There was something alarming in her words, but I tried not to give it too much importance. We continued to enjoy the cookies and tea, but an undercurrent of anxiety lingered. At one point, Isabel made another unexpected statement. "Can I stay until the evening?" I'd like to meet Brandon. The last time she saw him was at our wedding, and her desire to meet again seemed quite natural. I decided to discuss this with Brandon by sending him a short message. He replied that he could come early, and I informed Isabel that it was no problem. While I was cooking dinner, Isabel went out again, and I noticed her absence only after a while. When she returned, something about her appearance made me freeze for a moment. My familiar necklace hung around her neck. It was the necklace I kept in my bedroom. She smiled sheepishly, and noticing my reaction, posed like a model, turning her head to the side. "How do I look?" "Does it suit me?" she asked with a playful wink. My expression must have been too stunned, because Isabel quickly laughed. "Oh well, I'm just kidding. I found it and thought it was cute." Her explanation sounded naive, almost like an excuse a child might give after a prank. "It must be very expensive," she continued, her eyes never leaving the necklace. There was a hint of something else in her words, as if she were searching for approval. I replied softly, "Yes, this is a really valuable gift to Brandon." But what bothered me most was that this necklace was kept in our bedroom closet. How did she get to it? Isabel had clearly pretended to go to the bathroom, but then secretly looked into the bedroom. My anxiety grew, but I didn't want to create a scandal over something so trivial. Later, sensing my mild reaction, Isabel suddenly asked, "Can I borrow this necklace for a while? I have a date with a doctor I met on a dating app, and I want to wear it." I pretended to leave to the bathroom, but actually went to check the bedroom. My worst suspicions were confirmed. The closet wasn't completely closed, and the chest by the bed was ajar. The drawers, once neatly stacked, now looked as if someone had rummaged through them. Isabel must have searched every corner, checked every possible drawer. Her fingerprints were all over the jewelry, watches, leather straps, and metal surfaces. It even appeared she tried on my shoes, as the heels were slightly deformed from use. It was too much. She had clearly crossed the line. Back in the living room, I tried to stay calm, though I was seething with indignation. "You touched things in the bedroom, didn't you?" I began, my voice strained, but I held back, not wanting to escalate. "Your shoes are misshapen, and there are fingerprints on the watch," I added carefully, watching her reaction. Isabel just puffed out her cheeks like a child caught misbehaving, but instead of looking guilty, she seemed more annoyed at being caught. I took a deep breath, trying to avoid further confrontation. "Please don't do this again." At these words, her expression changed. She apologized, though her apology sounded unconvincing. I didn't want to make a big issue of it since our friendship spanned years, and I wasn't willing to ruin it over such an incident. So I laughed it off, trying to smooth over the awkwardness. When Brandon returned home, he was holding a cake box. It was a rare symbolic gesture, an occasion when we could all be together. Brandon and Isabel met for the first time after our wedding, and initially, their conversation was awkward, but gradually, they chatted like old friends. By dinner, their laughter filled the entire house, and I stood in the kitchen washing dishes, listening to their merriment. Brandon talked about his terrible boss, and Isabel agreed, expressing jealousy over his team. Brandon laughed, his eyes crinkling in amusement. I was a bit confused by the way Isabel casually touched Brandon's shoulder or arm, gestures that, though friendly, were noticeably intimate. I tried to convince myself it was just friendly banter, that it was better than seeing them alienated. After all, Brandon wasn't the type Isabel usually looked up to. Over the next month, I began noticing strange changes in Brandon's behavior. He started spending more time on his phone, something he'd never done before. His gaze would often drift away, and when I talked to him, he asked me to repeat myself, as if he hadn't truly heard me. The phone became his constant companion, even in the bathroom. It felt as though we were drifting apart, as if he were slipping into another reality from which I was excluded. Our conversations shortened and lost their former warmth. Soon, Brandon started working on weekends, citing work blockages, but it was hard to believe, especially since we no longer spent much time together. Then the situation worsened. Eventually, we began sleeping in separate rooms. He explained it away as fatigue, but I couldn't shake the feeling that an invisible wall had grown between us. One evening, when I returned home, I found divorce papers on the table. Brandon had already signed them. My heart skipped a beat, and my hands trembled with the stark realization that my suspicions had been confirmed. Even though I had suspected, seeing it clearly was still a blow. I called Brandon immediately. "I just came home and found the documents on the table," I said, though I already knew the answer. His voice on the phone was cold, almost indifferent. "I met someone else," he said, as if it were just another casual update. I felt something inside me shatter. "It's not just an affair, I'm serious," he continued. Then I heard a familiar female voice. It was Isabel. "I'm dating Brandon," she stated calmly, almost without emotion, as if it were routine. "I want to marry him," she added, her voice cold and distant, with not a trace of shame or regret. Isabel's words echoed in my mind. I felt my heart flutter and a cold sweat break out. I stood there, trying to process everything. The phone calls, Isabel's malicious tone, Brandon's icy indifference. It all merged into an endless nightmare. Her mocking voice still reverberated in my head. "Just sign the divorce papers and send them," she laughed, adding, "Good luck with your miserable life." The call ended abruptly, leaving me completely confused and helpless. Days of sleepless nights followed. Brandon stopped coming home, and I couldn't bring myself to even touch the divorce papers. They sat on the table like a mute reminder of a shattered life. To make matters worse, Isabel kept sending photos of her and Brandon together, portraying a perfect, happy couple. Images that stabbed at my heart repeatedly, plunging me into despair. It all felt unbearably cruel, as if I were being persecuted. My nerves frayed, and soon my health began to suffer. My complexion faded noticeably, and I felt sluggish and unfocused throughout the day. Those around me began to notice and urged me to see a doctor. Eventually, I was almost forcibly taken for treatment, where I was prescribed medications and strongly advised to rest. I managed to find some inner peace as the drugs helped me sleep at night again. When I returned home from the hospital, I felt slightly better, but then everything changed in an instant. One day, I heard a strange sound, as if something had fallen in the house. I went into the bedroom and opened the closet. My heart skipped a beat. My favorite bags and jewelry were gone. The watch I kept in the trunk was missing too. The trail was too obvious. Only one person could have done this. A wave of anger and frustration washed over me. I couldn't understand what I had done to Isabel that made her do this. The betrayal was too cruel. I tried to cope, but my mental state deteriorated again. Insomnia returned, and the days turned into a continuous struggle for survival. During a consultation with my doctor, I mentioned the theft, and I was strongly advised to contact a lawyer. I followed that advice and scheduled a meeting with our company's lawyer. When I met the lawyer, he asked, "What do you want to do?" Without hesitation, I answered, "I'm getting divorced. I want both of them to suffer the consequences." Those words came out easily and confidently, and I was amazed at my own resolve. Recently, I had been plunged into chaos, not knowing what to do, and now everything was clear. Perhaps the desire to punish them for everything they had put me through had given me strength. A week later, I received a message from Isabel. She was furious. "What did you think, sending me a registered letter to work? Is this some kind of joke?" Her voice was filled with anger and irritation. I remained calm and replied, "You should have expected this. Everything will be resolved through my lawyer." I felt my confidence rising. After that, she called a few more times, but I ignored all her calls. Soon, Brandon called, his voice strained. He discovered that I had sent a registered letter to his parents' house. Clearly, this move caused a huge scandal in their family. I almost laughed, imagining his bruised ego. But I restrained myself, knowing that revenge alone wouldn't heal me. I felt that simply putting the case in a lawyer's hands wasn't enough. I wanted to confront them personally, to look them in the eye and say everything I felt. The lawyer set a date for a meeting, and a few days later, we gathered in his office. Isabel and Brandon appeared reluctantly, without their lawyer. Isabel burst into the office like a storm, slamming the door open, and Brandon followed, looking awkward and depressed. A tense silence filled the room. We finally met face to face. "You're a coward!" Isabel blurted out, her eyes flashing with anger. Brandon tried to calm her, but her rage only intensified. "You've been avoiding us! Our wedding was postponed because of you!" she shouted, her face contorted with fury. It seemed she was ready to lash out physically, but only Brandon's intervention held her back. He looked desperate, trying to restrain her while I observed them with deep pity. The lawyer then intervened with calm authority. "Please calm down. If there's any violence or profanity, we'll call the police immediately." The mere mention of police made Isabel tense up, and she reluctantly settled. Isabel sat down opposite me, while Brandon, though looking defeated, took his place beside her. I sat across from them, ready for a discussion that was bound to end badly. "Louis, you're getting a divorce, right?" I asked, scrutinizing him. Isabel, with an angry glare, crossed her arms, while Brandon remained silent, his face clouded, as if he had finally resigned himself to fate. "We agreed to a divorce," he finally muttered, but I took the opportunity to press further. "Since your relationship is based on adultery, we demand alimony." My statement made Brandon flinch, and his gaze dimmed. "I agree to the divorce," he said without looking up. "But once the alimony is paid, you will never contact us again." His words carried a desperate finality, as if he were trying to maintain control. I nodded quietly, unwilling to extend the conversation further, sensing that enough had already been said. Isabel looked displeased, perhaps expecting me to fight harder, but I was too exhausted by the conflict. When the lawyer began discussing the alimony amount, Isabel snapped, "What difference does it make?" We have plenty of money." Her arrogance was palpable. She sat with her arms crossed, exuding confidence. The lawyer raised an eyebrow and said softly, "Oh yeah? Did Brandon ever tell you he's not the president of a jewelry company?" For a moment, Isabel's face paled as she stared at the lawyer in disbelief. Brandon, sitting next to her, hid his face in his hands. "What are you saying?" Isabel laughed nervously. "Do you really think you can joke like that? Brandon said he was the president of a company with a $3 billion turnover." She turned to Brandon, but he remained silent. "Actually, the president of the company is Catherine," the lawyer said with slight reproach, then looked at Brandon. At that moment, Brandon covered his face with his hands, muttering inaudibly. Isabel grabbed his hands, pleading, "You told me you're the president!" "That can't be a lie." His eyes, filled with fatigue and shame, finally met hers. A heavy silence followed. Isabel's face fell, and I observed her collapse with cold detachment, her world built on illusions beginning to crumble. Suddenly, Isabel stood up, shocked and agitated, and screamed, "That's a lie! You're not the president at all!" She turned to me, trembling. "Why didn't I know about this? After everything we've been through." Her words were lost in the intensity of the moment. "Don't worry," the lawyer said calmly. "We have irrefutable evidence of your guilt." He took out his phone and showed a surveillance photo of Isabel sneaking into a bedroom, picking up bags and jewelry, stuffing them into her bag. The entire scene was captured on camera, and Isabel stared speechlessly, her eyes wide with horror. "What is this? Why did you record me?" A note of panic crept into her voice. "This is legal surveillance," Brandon mumbled, covering his face again, his breathing heavy. "This is our house," I replied calmly. "We've always had surveillance cameras. Why didn't you ask me about this before? Who would have thought you'd break into my house and steal things?" My head ached from the absurdity of it all, and I was losing patience. "And you used my key without permission," I continued softly. Isabel tried to defend herself. I wanted these things. It's your fault you didn't buy them for me." Her excuses were absurd, leaving even Brandon visibly stunned. "You kept arguing," I said coldly, "but it doesn't matter anymore. Save your excuses about theft for later. We will file a police report." At the mention of the police, Isabel panicked. "The police? That's too much." I just borrowed a few things from a friend," she pleaded weakly. "I never gave you permission to borrow anything," I replied calmly. "Besides, you were never truly my friend. You were just a classmate." My decision was final. I was filing a police report. Isabel, having lost all pride, slowly knelt down, her voice like a hurricane's whisper, overflowing with tears. "Please, I beg you, forgive me." I looked down at her, feeling nothing but cold determination. "What are you going to do? Can you even compensate for the value of what you stole?" I asked. She froze, her confidence melting away like mist under the morning sun. Her sincere tears became her only weapon in this unequal battle. "Louis," she pleaded to Brandon, "please, I beg you, pay for me." Her voice trembled, but Brandon's gaze remained distant, his thoughts hidden. I realized then that he couldn't help her. His own life was in jeopardy. "You know they're going to fire you, right?" I added with steely resolve, watching Brandon's eyes fill with fear. "Is it true? What is it?" he whispered, as if hoping I'd shoulder the burden. "Everything's been decided. Since you left home, your absence has been noticed at work. Complaints have piled up. I explained to your boss that you looked like you were about to collapse," I continued, my tone emotionless, like reciting the weather forecast. You still have the right to share the property, Isabel interjected softly, though her words rang hollow. I'll pay. I'll find a way, she tried to reassure both of us. But that's impossible, I replied confidently. Catherine and Brandon had a prenuptial agreement. Didn't you know? Brandon, his head down, suddenly jumped up as if struck by lightning. Why didn't you ever tell me about this? He asked, a mix of reproach and bewilderment in his voice. I looked at him with contempt. You never wanted to hear the truth, Brandon, I said, barely containing my irritation. His eyes glistened with sudden realization, as if awaking from a long sleep. At that moment, he finally understood that dreams of a simple, happy future had crumbled into dust, and his world had become nothing more than an unattainable illusion. The lawyer then placed the contract on the table, a cold, smooth document outlining that, if the marriage lasted less than 5 years, neither party could claim the other's property. We were in our 3rd year, and this clause loomed over us like a thundercloud. Isabel, upon seeing the contract, tried to snatch it as if she wanted to tear it apart like an unlucky ticket leading to ruin. I couldn't help but comment, handle this carefully. It's notarized, and you can be held legally responsible for damaging it. My words, full of cold determination, froze the air. At the mere mention of a possible crime, Isabel froze like a prey caught mid-flight. Half sincerely, she turned to Brandon with pleading eyes. Brandon, you have savings, right? Use them to pay, she implored, her voice trembling with hope. Brandon looked at her with fear and confusion. What kind of money? You always only wanted a sushi steak, he muttered, his words heavy with disbelief. It was clear he had no savings left. Even his debts were from dubious sources. Isabel's shoulders slumped like a bird losing its strength, and it was almost a spectacle. Her once glamorous appearance now haggard and tired, her eyes darkened with the weight of her mistakes. She muttered, What should I do now? The question hung in the air like a stagnant cloud, unfulfilled. I felt the gravity of it all. Each of us was trapped in a room of sorrow, searching for an escape. Yet hope was as elusive as morning mist vanishing under the sun. I decided to leave the rest to the lawyer and got up, full of heavy thoughts. I left some money for Isabel, a symbolic reminder that true wealth is earned through one's own efforts. That ended our discussion, and the divorce proceeded smoothly, as if fate itself had cleared the way, sparing us needless obstacles. I returned all of Brandon's belongings to his parents, who kept them safely until his return. It was a bittersweet scene, heavy with nostalgia and regret. My parents greeted me with humility and gratitude, yet their eyes betrayed concern for their son, knowing his peace of mind was lost forever. Isabel, meanwhile, was not faring well. She sent me a long apology letter, admitting her mistakes and expressing a hope for understanding. Yet beneath the remorse was a hint of lost opportunities, a premonition of what could have been if things had gone differently. Meanwhile, the police began questioning Isabel about trespassing and theft. My police report sparked an investigation, and soon Isabel was arrested after admitting her guilt. Half of the stolen items were later sold on the black market, but I managed to recover the rest. I felt both relief and sorrow. Despite her malicious actions, there was remorse in her attempts to make amends, a sign she wasn't entirely lost. She hoped for a suspended sentence, though it soon became clear that her record was far from clean. Her clever maneuvers in the dating scene had spiraled into theft from men she met online, worsening her situation and paving the way for a real prison term. No wonder the word police sent her into a panic, as if it were a curse. Unable to endure the constant reminders of Isabel's betrayal, Brandon moved into a semi-detached house on the outskirts. This new beginning gave him a chance to start over, to leave behind the haunting memories of Isabel and all the emotional storms. Yet each step forward was fraught with uncertainty. Despite his efforts, his former life, filled with prosperity and stability, had crumbled into a series of rejections and unfulfilled dreams. Brandon wandered the streets like a ghost, searching for a job to restore his lost dignity, forced to settle for day labor under conditions he once thought impossible. After the divorce, I immersed myself in work, seeking refuge from the heavy memories. Work became my sanctuary, where I could focus on meaningful projects. I decided to expand our company's jewelry line to the European market, an ambitious step inspired by a trip to Europe that provided both a break from stress and a burst of creativity. In Switzerland, over a glass of wine at a cozy restaurant, I met the owner of a local jewelry store. Our conversation about design, colors, and textures sparked passion and inspiration. He understood my struggles, perhaps because he too had experienced a painful divorce. He agreed to showcase our designs in his store, merging business with a hint of personal connection. That prospect inspired me. I was driven not just by business goals, but partly by the chance to see him again, a thought that occasionally overwhelmed me despite my best efforts to remain composed. I believed I deserved this privilege after all I had endured. Every day, I threw myself into my work, finding solace in its routine, even as I received updates from our lawyer about their unfolding legal troubles. I realized I wasn't alone in my hardships. Brandon, though in a different industry, was also struggling with the consequences of his decisions. While I couldn't change his fate, I hoped he would eventually recover. No matter how hard it was, I was determined to build a new future free of old resentments and regrets.